It's so refreshing in this episode to hear Byron talk about how he shares his therapy sessions with his friends and how being more vulnerable has really deepened his relationships. The shift from seeing emotional honesty as a strength instead of a weakness can allow people to really stop fighting these battles alone in their minds. We cover breakups, anxiety, the impact of social media, holding space for those really tough conversations, being judged for setting some of those boundaries in your life, the stigma around mental health. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you do too. When did you first understand what mental health was?
So when I was 19, I went through a pretty bad breakup, and that at the time was really the first time I felt depression at a really big scale. I was in like an easy job at the time, and had sort of, I suppose, distanced myself from my friends and things like that, and had kind of tailored my life around this relationship. So when it came to an end, so did my meaning and my purpose. And at 19, I had no idea what depression or anxiety was or any of that. All I knew was that I felt absolutely shit. So I suppose that was really the starting point for me. That was really the point for me where I started to really prioritize my mental health, start to explore what it was, and try to understand it.
For those of you that are listening that don't know what kind of anxiety and depression is, Byron, do you mind explaining, I guess, how you experienced both depression and anxiety?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I suppose the biggest feeling was a feeling of lost. I just felt so lost. I felt I had no purpose. I had no direction whatsoever. I had no motivation to do anything. And it felt like my brightest days were behind me. My best days were behind me, which is really sad. When I look back now and 19-year-old me, I kind of want to just give him a hug, because it's so sad to think that that's at 19 years old. I was thinking that, I still had my whole life ahead of me. And that was my mindset. That's all I could feel. And so, I would say that would be my experience of depression, and my feeling of it. Obviously for everyone, it's different. But for me, that's what it was.
And how about anxiety? How did anxiety show up in your life?
So I mean, anxiety for me is kind of is strange because I have been anxious and I have had panic attacks without realizing I was having panic attacks. It's not until years later, when I've been doing like research on it and looking at the symptoms and what they actually are, that I started to realize, like, shit, like, I'm quite an anxious person. I might like pick at things or do things, not so much anymore, but used to do it a lot and used to have certain habits to kind of try and ease my anxiety. I remember when I think I was 18, getting on a flight to New York, and I felt excited to go to New York until I was going up the elevator in Heathrow, and there was big glass windows, and you could then see the planes. And we went up, and as soon as I saw the plane we were getting on, I felt so sick, like to my stomach, and couldn't breathe properly. Like all of my breathing just completely tightened up. And I had no idea what it was. I thought I had a stomach bug. I literally thought I was about to throw up because I had a stomach bug. I was like, oh, I must have eaten something, and it's not until I felt fine. I felt anxious the whole time we were on the flight. Felt like I was going to throw up the whole time we were on the flight. As soon as we touched down in New York, didn't feel sick anymore. And it was like this, it was crazy because I had no idea what was going on. I just, thought I had maybe ate something wrong, ate something that was a bit dodgy, and as a result was feeling it. And again, anxiety shows up differently for every single person, and everyone handles it differently. But yeah, I suppose that was probably that was a real big moment in my life where I look back and I'm like, damn, like I was experiencing serious anxiety about flying, but I didn't even know I was. That's how uneducated I was about mental health. So yeah, that was an interesting experience for sure.
It's really interesting you say that about depression as well. Would you say that about depression as well? That it seems like this is a common thread across the conversations I've had so far, and through research that I've done, that it's often only in reflection, once it's got to a really bad stage, that you've spoken to someone and they've kind of made you reflect on it, and you realize, wow, there was a quite a long period where I was doing self-destructive things, I was overthinking, I was in a state, and it's only through like reflecting that you realize how long you're actually experiencing those issues.
Oh, massively, yeah, absolutely, and it's something that you have to monitor for sure, because I think it's very easy to fall back into those habits and to do those things, you know. So it's like you say about overthinking and things like that, right? You have to almost, especially at the beginning, until you form almost the healthy habits and um, the healthy things in your life, you kind of need to be quite proactive around it. And I think, like you say, like reflection is such a big thing, because looking back, it helps you. You know, it helps you understand where you are at and how you can improve your future. You know, neuroplasticity is a thing, right? It's a real thing. So if you're always thinking about the shit stuff in your life, and you're always thinking about what you don't have, then you're going to naturally your brain is going to feed that. It's going to go that way. If you're thinking more about the positive things in your life, and you're thinking about the opportunities in your life, then over time your brain will move to that as well. So it's a choice, but it's a proactive choice. You have to be aware that sometimes your mind is lying to you. You know, your emotions are lying to you. If you're feeling shit and you're feeling like there is no brighter days ahead, the chances are that's just the emotional state you're in right in that moment. And you can change it, but you have to start being proactive and start almost telling yourself you can, you know. And I think that's where it starts.
Yeah, that's so interesting. You mentioned the neuroplasticity there, and one of the things when I went through therapy, and one of the things of like I had with anxiety was just like almost like compulsive overthinking. Like there were just certain things that would trigger me, and then I wouldn't be able to like break that cycle of thinking. And I remember they were telling me, and I'm not going to be able to remember this word for word, but it's like the phrase they used was like neurons that fire together wire together. Like your brain's trying to get better at something, can try and be more effective, so those pathways that you keep repeating, in the same way that if you try and get better at sports, you do the same movement, your brain starts to learn them and do it automatically. And my brain had just wired these thought loops so well together that I couldn't break them. If I had a trigger, that would just cause this negative kind of like thinking loop. Um, what what were some of the, I guess, the negative habits that you kind of reflected on and realized that you were doing that were kind of causing some of the kind of negative behavior?
At the time when I remember like a big one for me when I was like 19 and going through that experience. Obviously, with COVID, and you know, obviously I've had situations, you know, since then as well that have also been challenging. But I remember particularly at that time, probably a big one was social media. Going through social media and just constantly comparing, like constantly, and constantly thinking someone, you know, is further along in their life or look better or look happier or whatever, right? And instead of just enjoying my life, you know. And I think that's a big thing about social media. We can be so busy watching other people, and how great their lives are, that we just forget to enjoy ours. And it's great that other people are enjoying theirs, you know, and you should definitely always champion that. But you should also, I think, prioritize yourself too, and remember that, you know, quite often social media is a highlight reel. And it's important to, yeah, really prioritize yourself and just enjoy your life.
That's so well said about social media. Just in, like you get obsessed with watching other people's lives tick by, and you're losing focus on what's going on in your own. Is that something you managed to stop doing now, or is that something you still struggle with?
Yeah, still struggle with it a bit. But what I now do is delete the apps. So I delete the apps and then I just download them for a particular like period of time to reply to messages, see what my friends are doing, all that kind of stuff, and then I'll delete it straight afterwards again. I find that helps so much, because otherwise you literally can spend hours on social media, and it's like oh, I really need to get that thing done, and that thing will move you towards your goals. It will make you feel better once it's done, right? But it's just so easy to pick up your phone, just flick through and see what other people are doing, right? So yeah, that's why I do that. It's to almost, what we were talking about earlier about healthy habits and forcing those healthy habits to begin with. For me to shake, social media, I just delete it. I get rid of it. It's sort of like how, if you want to lose weight, don't have junk food in your house. If you want to get healthy physically, if you have chocolate bars and crisps around the house all the time, you're going to have temptations, right? If you don't have them, it's going to be easier to like stick with the diet and eat well and all that kind of stuff. And I think it's the same thing when it comes to our phones, and what we do and who we engage with as well. That even comes down to like people, and yeah, it's a whole other topic. But I think junk values are really a thing that need to be assessed, and I think it's something that we can just I know Johan Hari talks about this a lot, like the junk values thing, and Stephen Bartlett touches on it as well, about how we are kind of almost in society forced and pushed to have junk values, and so it's important that we're being proactive, and protecting our energy and protecting ourselves.
Such a good, yeah, that's such a good way of dealing with it. It's something I'm struggling with at the moment. I wouldn't go as far as phone addiction, but it's 3-4 hours a day I'm using on my phone. And I was speaking to my friends about kind of a more serious subject, and one of them suffers with porn addiction, and he was like, because I've got my phone on me, it's like a cocaine addict walking around with a bag of coke in their pocket the whole time, and it's the same with our phones. We can't like and also, it's like if I'm feeling anxious, it's a vicious cycle because I'll be like, for some reason, scrolling social media like numbs the like anxious feelings that I get. Also, probably perpetuates it, but for some reason, it numbs it. And yeah, it's one of those ones where deleting it is it's sad that it's got to that point, but they're built by psychologists to be as addictive as possible, and yeah, that's so true.
It's weird as well, because when I do speak to people about it, and if I meet some people or whatever, I'm like, oh, do you have Instagram or whatever, and and I'm like, oh, I'll have to put it into your phone or add you later because I don't have the app downloaded. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, no, I just don't have I always delete the apps, like, when I don't use them. And a lot of people find it quite weird, but I suppose it's whatever helps you, right? And it helps, yeah, and helps kind of you. And I found it be the most sort of effective way. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, I've muted notifications and stuff like that, but then I just go back on it anyway. So it didn't really, it doesn't really do much.
This is a topic I've kind of, yeah, again, spoken about with my friends is changing, like feeling like if you do something to protect your mental health or protect your energy, whatever it is, that sometimes you can get judged for it because it might go against, I guess, whatever the social culture is at the moment, or you may get judgment from friends, co-workers. Is there anything that you've changed that you've kind of noticed people making a comment on, or judging anyway?
Um, I mean, that for sure. Like, the fact that I don't have social media apps on my phone, I think a few people find that strange. Um, what else? When I say I journal, sometimes some people react a bit differently to that. I think having therapy is like becoming more and more of a talked about thing now, and I'm extremely open that I have therapy. I'll talk to my friends about a session that I had with my therapist if I thought it was really good. If I feel like it's great to share, I'll be like, oh, I had this therapy session the other day and it was a game changer because of this and this and this. So because I think personally it's important to normalize the conversation around therapy and like all of that, and protecting your mental health and prioritizing your mental health. I don't think it should be anything to be ashamed of. I think every single person should have therapy. I think if everyone had therapy, so many less, people would struggle a lot less, for sure. It really does help, definitely. So yeah, I don't know. I don't I actually don't meditate, which has been something I've wanted to do for a while. I know a few of my friends do. I don't know what kind of reactions they get from doing that. Um, but yeah, trying to think if there's anything else, but nothing else that kind of pops into my mind.
Thank you for sharing that thing about therapy as well, and that you've opened up to your friends about that. Was that like, did you consciously think I should be sharing this with my friends, or was it just a natural kind of a natural reaction to share?
Yeah, definitely a bit of both. I think there's still a big stigma surrounding therapy, and people going to therapy. I think people see it as like a really big deal when they almost keep putting it off because they're like, oh, I don't know, like they almost don't know what to expect and everything else. And yeah, so I kind of do it for that reason for sure. I want to try and normalize it as much as possible, but also I find all of this so interesting. Whenever I find something out new about myself or about mental health as a whole, I just love to share it. I just hence why we're friends, right? Like we're good friends because of that. Like we both have this common interest, and it's such a great thing. I think being able to have conversations about mental health and prioritizing your mental wellness is such a beautiful thing, and I don't think anything bad could come from that. I think it's so beautiful when companies pay for therapy for their employees. I think that's just such a great thing to do, and what every company should be doing, regardless of if it's about work or not, because essentially, it's a win-win, right? Like if your employees are feeling better about themselves and they're developing and growing, then of course they're going to perform better at work, right? So yeah, I don't see it as a bad thing at all, and I think it's yeah, something that should be prioritized.
Yeah, I mean, the difference between like an employee that is anxious and on edge and not being able to understand their emotions compared to someone that's gone through therapy, it's like whatever money you can put into like personal development or courses for people will be outdone by someone having a real strong grip on their mental well-being for sure. Um, yeah, the the other bit that I just thought was when you brought up therapy to your friends, what was the conversation like? How did they react, and has it sparked further conversations about their own mental health?
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, the biggest thing was when I started Grey Matter. That really stemmed the conversation around mental health for me and my friends. Less so the therapy stuff. I think purely because we were doing mental health related things with Grey Matter anyway. Um, that was almost a big enough catalyst. But even when I do talk about therapy now, they do definitely take an interest in it, and I think some of them have even said like they want to start therapy. I don't think they have yet, but it's almost started that thing where they're like, yeah, actually, I want to do that, and it's opening that up to them, which I think is a great thing. But definitely when I started Grey Matter, the conversations I had with my friends were unbelievable. Like I got to know them on another level. Bearing in mind I've known some of my friends for like over 10 years, and then all of a sudden they were opening up to me in a way they never have in those 10 years, 10, 15 years, which was unreal. It was so beautiful. It brought us together, and now it kind of has got to that point where for a few of my friends especially, we have those types of chats. If I'm like, how are you doing, and they'll just be honest. Like they're like, well, I'm okay, but this has happened and this has happened, and like and we'll just dive into it and talk about it. And I think that's such a great thing. And I think if everyone could have that and do that, like think about how many less people would be struggling, just being able to be honest with their friends rather than going back to what you were saying earlier about those people that are like, oh, man up and just get on with it or whatever. They're probably the people that are saying that are probably actually struggling. um so yeah, I think we need to change the perception. I think vulnerability is strength, and I think it's important that more people became aware of that and started to see that. Um, I think a lot of people, and I think there's still a huge amount of stigma around being vulnerable as being weak. It's not. It's being open, but it's not being weak. It's being strong, because being vulnerable is fucking scary. And if you can be vulnerable, then if you can be vulnerable to other people and yourself, most importantly yourself, then you can fucking do anything, And so going back to what you were saying earlier about employees and working working in companies and all that kind of stuff, if people are able to break down those barriers, if they're able to get through those blocks and become honest and open with themselves and undo maybe trauma or setbacks or whatever it may be, think about how much more they will, how much stronger they will feel. They'll feel so much stronger, they'll feel better, and ultimately they'll probably get so much more out of life because of it. So yeah, I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think there's a really important needle to thread what you were saying there about if you open up, that creates space for other people to be vulnerable. It's one of the things why in, for example, in comedy or in sales, to get people to like you quicker, the first thing they do is be really vulnerable. They'll share something really like personal about them. It's a tactic people use in psychology to get you to open up, but in a really nice way. If you open up to your friends, you are creating that deeper relationship, that more beautiful relationship. So the way I always like think about it myself, and it lines up with exactly what you were saying, is you are stopping yourself having better relationships with your friends and family by not opening up. You are, and connection and friendship and love are all the things that people value the most at the end of the day. And you are reducing the ability to have the best relationship possible. You're reducing your productivity and happiness in those things by not opening up. So it's I'd see it as like a trade-off. If you don't want to be vulnerable, then you're just foregoing better relationships. So it's a different way to look at it, but it's yeah, I think it's so important.
Yeah, completely agree. Completely agree. Yeah, absolutely. And it takes friendships to like another level, when you're able to kind of break down those barriers and have those conversations. And it's such a great thing because me and my friends have such a great relationship because of it, and we're able to be honest with each other and look out for each other. And because we know each other so well, we know if something's up, even if they haven't voiced it yet, if they haven't felt that comfortable to voice it yet, um and I think that's such a great thing, being able to see those cues and being able to support each other and just be there for each other, is such a great thing. So yeah.
I think one thing that people are often concerned about is if their friend comes to them and goes, they've got this problem, they've got this really serious issue, they've got an issue with their mental health, is how to handle it. A lot of people are scared to say the wrong thing, or they're afraid they're going to have the wrong thing to say. Is there any advice or things that you've done when friends have opened up to you, or things you'd wish people had said to you in those moments that could help someone?
Yeah. So the biggest thing is just listen. That's it. Like, for some situations you're not going to be able to say the right thing, and that's okay. So quite often what works and what helps is just asking open-ended questions. My One of my oldest friends has recently gone through an extremely traumatic experience. He just lost a child, and um and like as a result, he's, it's hard, right? Like, it's what do you say in that moment, and I kind of realized there's nothing I can say that's going to help that, right? Nothing's going to help him or make him feel better or anything like that. But what I can do is I can give him a hug, and I can sit there and I can just listen to him. And that's what I've done. I've just tried to be there as much as I can. I've just tried to show up as much as I can, because I feel that's all you can do. Sometimes you can't fix situations, and I think as human beings, and especially if it's a loved one, right, we want to fix it. Like, we want to fix it, we want to make it better for them because they're in pain and we want to help them. But sometimes we just can't. Sometimes we can. Sometimes we can do things. Sometimes we can listen. We can open and ask open-ended questions to be able to help them get to a conclusion. But ultimately, sometimes we're not able to help them. But what we can do is, or at least solve the problem for them. But what we can do is we can help them and we can be there for them. And so I think it's less about what you say. And I think, so for people, for example, if someone's worried about speaking to their mate about their mate's mental health because they don't know what to say, or the questions to ask, so then they don't say anything, that's probably like the worst thing you could do, right? Like, even if you just asked, like, are you all right, and then just listened, and maybe it might be a case that you have to ask if they're all right a couple of times, or if you can see if you see they're not okay and they're saying, like, yeah, I'm fine, you're like, are you sure? Like, sorry to push, like, obviously, if you're not feeling, obviously don't need to speak about anything, but just let, I'm here for a chat if you need. And just opening that conversation up and knowing that they're not alone can sometimes do absolute wonders, because when people don't feel judged and they feel like they're in a safe space, hence why therapy is such a beautiful thing. When people are in a safe space and they feel like they're in a safe space, they feel comfortable to open up. And when you open up, you ease the load off your shoulders. You take the load off your shoulders. You don't feel so heavy, and you don't feel like you have 1,000,001 things running around your head anymore, and you ultimately feel so much better for it. So being able to just open up those conversations is such an important thing. And I don't think anyone should be scared about having those conversations or asking their mate if they're okay, because it's okay, just ask them how they're doing and just listen. You don't have to have the solution. Sometimes just listening is enough.
That was incredibly said. And I think if more men can do that, if they can sometimes, maybe it's swallow their ego, I don't know what the right phrase is, and just give their mate a hug and hold the space for them and go, I don't know what the right thing to say is, but I'm here for you, and you can say whatever you want to me, and I will just listen, and I'm not going to try and give you advice. I'm just going to be here for you, and I love you, mate. And I think that would do a lot of things for a lot of people, to know that they've got their friends to, even if it's just sit there in silence and watch TV, knowing that if they can speak to their mate, they can, and you're holding that space for them.
Yeah, completely. It's just listening. It's just being there for each other, and sometimes that is all people want. Maybe they don't want to talk about it. Maybe they just want to sit in your company and just know that you're there. Sometimes that's enough. There's, everyone handles it differently. And that's okay. It's just more of a case of showing up for people and being there for people. And of course, being there for yourself as well, looking after yourself and making sure you're okay too.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on, Byron. That was amazing. Loved chatting to you, and thank you for being so honest and vulnerable there.
Yeah, no worries at all. Thanks so much for having me on. Loved it. That was a great chat.
I want to set you a challenge. Pick the person in your phone book you think is feeling the most down right now, or someone who hasn't turned up to a social event recently, and just ask them how they're doing. You may have to ask a couple times, but ask them how they're really doing. Because chances are, even if they don't want to open up, they'll have really appreciated you reaching out to them. Thank you.